Okay, so first of all, I'd like to introduce you to one of my colleagues, Rohan Panesar, who was with us this summer working on this report. And Rohan, if you just want to say hello.
Yeah, hi guys. I'm currently studying at UE, but did an internship over summer with Davis Company, as he said, and learned a lot about vulnerability disclosure.
Yeah, and Rohan is not really what you would consider the traditional cybersecurity person. So Rohan is really an economist. And I think it's really important that we get more and more disciplines involved in the cybersecurity world, because it's not purely technical and we can absolutely learn, and those disciplines can learn from us too, and hopefully make a better world. So this talk today is about really shining a light on what the real true state of vulnerability disclosure is in the market. And we have done this report for the past 3 years, and we've tried to keep the methodology the same as you will hear. Yeah, we will tell you about some of the experiences that we had. The way that we've approached this, about 3 years ago, as I say, we looked at, how to assess the state of IoT manufacturing. We knew that it was really, really bad. We knew that there had been a lot of bad experiences for users and for the internet in general. But how do you measure that? How do you measure insecurity and how do you measure security? It's actually quite difficult. But there are some indicators that will tell you whether something is really something to be watched in terms of badness or not. And one of those things is whether a company is actively working with security researchers. So this is best practice within the general computing world. And probably for about the past 20 years, vulnerability disclosures have been going on more formally than they used to. But it really has become more formal since the ISO specifications were produced, published in 2014 onwards. But as many of the companies that are coming into the IoT space are largely digitizing for the first time, it's clear that they don't really have a great understanding of it. And if you imagine what the end consumer sees when they're buying these products, or an enterprise, well, this is what they think they're buying: something nice and shiny and looks great, fantastic, I'd love to live there. And actually, in reality, when they get it, they find that maybe this thing doesn't live up to expectations. And yes, there may be a warranty, but actually in the consumer product world, there's actually very little comeback, especially if you bought it on the internet. So this is actually still the real situation for a lot of products, particularly at the cheaper end of the market. But even as you've heard during this conference, at the more expensive end, this sort of cobbled together product that doesn't quite meet our expectations and is kind of wholly when it comes from a security perspective. There are known vulnerabilities within those products. So that also applies to the way that these companies are operating as businesses. In a lot of cases, they're fly by night, and they're not really operating a proper and sound business. And so when it comes to dealing with outsiders reporting things to them, particularly security researchers and the hacking community, it ends up being really bad. So what we've got here is the third edition of the report. It was published on the IoTSF website today, and it builds on the data from 2018 and 2019. And the data for this report was gathered over the summer through to September of this year. So I'm going to hand over to Rohan to talk to you about our approach.
So this is David's analogy picture, or what it was like wading through a sewer in the dark, shining the light of truth. So the approach we took was we had these 25 global retailers, and we were looking at these global retailers for the mostly global companies operating in the consumer IoT space. And we hope to capture a range of companies from startups to billion-dollar companies, so we could have a representative coverage of the market as a whole. And our approach this year has changed slightly because we added some new categories. So we added laptops, PCs, and tablets, added Wi-Fi and networking products, we expanded the health and fitness category into health, fitness, and well-being. And then out of the original health and fitness category, we carved out the wearables into its own category because the DCMS call for views specifically mentioned wearables as their own category. So we thought we'd have that as their own. And then the scientific basis hasn't changed this year. It just means the data is more representative of the space as a whole. We've got more data. And so the basic research basically involved, so first of all, finding these companies and then going through and basically seeing if they had a check in the box of these categories. So the categories were a vulnerability disclosure policy, vulnerability disclosure type, if they've got a public disclosure time given in days, formal reporting system, a PGP key, bug bounties, proxy disclosure, and if they've got proxy disclosure, then what proxy disclosure company that is, and then whether they've got a security.txt and whether they've got a /security page. And then basically all of this raw data came together to produce the results that Dave is going to look into now.
Thanks, Rohan. And so what's happened over the years is obviously we've refined our methodology, but we've also tried to make sure that we anchored that in the original report so that all of the results that we will show you are consistent going right back to the original report, so we can see that sort of scientifically that we can do those comparisons. You'll see that we also updated our methodology slightly this year as well and refined it. We've started to refine some of the categories as well. But here we have the key findings from the report. So in our first year, we discovered that less than 10% of all consumer IoT companies had any way for vulnerability reporters or security researchers to contact them. So that was less than 10% of all of the over 330 companies that we looked at. Last year, that got slightly better to 13.3%. And based on the original figures, that rose to 16.3% year on year to this year in 2020. Now, what we've also done this year has entered some new products and new product categories. So we extended this into, for example, laptops and routers. And that gives this kind of a bit of a boost. But as it's a new category, we want to show you that that uplift comes with those products from the traditional IT sector where the disclosure best practice is more well implemented. And going forward, we will then adopt these categories in the future. So, realistically, we're still looking at a very poor situation, for researchers, for 4 out of 5 companies that they may want to contact, there is no way of them contacting them. And that is incredibly poor, given that legislation is on the way. And in some ways, it justifies that legislation. We've also noticed that 3 years is a long time in our IoT, and we have seen attrition in the market. So of the 330 companies that we first surveyed in 2018, around 11.5% of those firms are either no longer operating or no longer provide the products originally listed in the study. And so we've seen this, there are a lot of IoT products that are really testing the market. They're new ideas, and some of them don't work. Obviously, lack of customer interest is probably one of those explanations, but also whether the product itself was viable. We did see in one case that the IoT product was pulled from the market due to privacy concerns. And of course, business considerations, business changes another consideration as firms switch their focus away from products that fail. We noticed, for example, Osram announced that it'll shut down the server for the Lightify system, and that happened at the end of August as part of a transition to becoming a photonics company. So this is the breakdown of the companies in a segment with a policy, and these are the new segments that we have here. We have 50 new products added to the 2020 data set. These have been chosen to reflect developments in the market and to build out a harmonized set of categories such as health, fitness, and well-being, laptops, PCs, and tablets, wearables, and Wi-Fi and networking. So these new labels and categories will assist us when we're matching the results against the future scope of regulations and legislation that's incoming, and we've been monitoring that. Some of these categories perform relatively strongly. For example, in Wi-Fi and networking, that pretty much tops the list. More than 85% have vulnerability disclosure policy. And at face value, this seems like providers such as router makers, well, at least those that are available to buy through retail channels. So the analysis doesn't consider devices that are bundled as part of broadband packages. The ones that are in the retail chain are at least on the right path here. And I would have expected that, to be honest. I hoped that would be the case. And we also know that routers are a source of lots of vulnerabilities as well. So it's only an indication of how easy it is to contact these companies. But if we look at other categories, so the category with the most entries, which is smart home, that really doesn't fare very well at all. And only 15.8% of the product surveys can be linked to a publicly available disclosure policy. And really, that has to change. We found that security researchers could potentially face unnecessary delays for, as I say, 4 out of 5 products in that number 1 category of consumer devices. It's really not good. Now, if we look at the next slide, which is about the regional variations, I just have to put a health warning on this, in that, for consistency, we put the region assigned to each company in the study based on headquarter location. It is very difficult, and this is another problem that researchers find. It's very difficult to work out the headquarter locations or where this company is truly based in many cases, and that's a symptom of globalization, but it's also a symptom of production sites and brand licensing. So whilst Europe remains in 3rd spot behind the US and Asia, that probably reflects that most of the manufacturing is done in Asia as well. As Rohan mentioned, in 2019, we started recording the use of /security and security.txt. We noticed that about 17 of the companies in total used a /security page. That's not great. And also security.txt, which is quite a new initiative for security researchers, we only found 7 instances in total compared with 3 in 2019. That's very difficult, different to the IT space. And we do expect that to catch up over time. The UK's NCSC, for example, lists security.txt as an essential component in its vulnerability disclosure toolkit, which was released in September this year. And also we have to think about the regional variations as well. So in terms of the usage of schemes such as BugCrowd and HackerOne and proxy disclosure schemes. So we found around 2/3 of the 64 companies with a public channel for vulnerability disclosure actually used a proxy service to do that on their behalf. And it was sort of split between HackerOne and BugCrowd, and you can see more details in the report. So this year, what we've also done is established a threshold test. So to qualify, what we've done is looked at the draft legislation and standards that are out there, and IoT providers would need to demonstrate that they both had a vulnerability disclosure policy and a reporting system in place, and that they'd given information on the timelines for acting on the issues disclosed. So we found that less than 20% of firms would meet the basic criteria, and of just over 1% would comply in terms of the reporting and an advertised timeline. So what that means is that we have got some more data here, is that really 4 qualify into that second test. And so we will continue to publish this, and we'll continue to track this in the future. But at the moment, there's only 4 companies, that's Google, Western Digital, Wink, and Xiaomi, that really meet the extended threshold, and a further 64 that meet that basic threshold that would mean compliance with legislation and regulations. But of course, the red category, there's 274 companies. They don't have to do a lot, but they do need to get up to that basic threshold. Otherwise, in the future, they could be breaking the law in some countries. So I'm going to hand over back to Rohan to talk about the economics of IoT vulnerability disclosure.
Yeah, so as David mentioned, I'm doing economics. We said I'm an economist, but that's a bit of an overstatement. But so I chose to do the economics of vulnerability disclosure as my dissertation topic. And economics and economic incentives truly are at the core of vulnerability disclosure. And I thought I'd have a very brief look into some of the stuff that's going on in this. So some of the players in this, the security researchers are the people that actually go out there and find these vulnerabilities, and their incentives are sort of usually bug bounties. And the vendors, so in this case, that's the companies selling these IoT products, and they usually offer bug bounties, or they pay for security, or they pay to fix an exploit. And they operate within these markets. So there are these clear markets, which are the companies paying these bug bounties, etc. Gray markets, so companies like the Rhodium that buy these 0 days and then sell them on to whoever, so nation states or individual actors. But once these 0 days have been sold, they're more than likely not going to be used to improve the security of a product. And then there are black markets, and these are the darknet markets for vulnerabilities and exploits. But it's already very hard to find empirical data for the clear markets and gray markets. So I'm not going to be delving into the black markets in my dissertation, I don't think. And then there are some other secondary players, just criminal organizations, so the hackers or the people selling these exploits on the darknets. And then governments whose policy can change how these economic incentives work for each player, which can in turn kind of change the dynamic between them. So for example, if government brings in stricter regulations onto gray markets, this might boost the use of clear markets by security researchers, or it could flip to the other side and boost the use of darknet markets. And what's really tough in it essentially boils down to quantifying the cost of security. So that's both implementing security and then the potential costs of a vulnerability being exploited and dealing with that as a company. So while it's clear that financial incentives like bug bounties are essential, sort of a good relationship and communication between security researchers and vendors is foundational in this cybersecurity space. And I'm sure people have heard the horror stories of companies threatening legal action against security researchers, and it just adds this whole other element of a PR disaster, and however much that costs. And a clear vulnerability disclosure policy is really important, and it helps improve understanding on both sides and move the process a lot smoother.
Thanks, Rohan. So just to quickly run through some conclusions from this. So what we're seeing is that vulnerability disclosure in companies is continuing to get better, in albeit a slow way, but it's still relatively poor. The traditional consumer IT sectors are very mature, but clearly could still get better. We're not seeing 100% yet. And companies should work on getting to the basic threshold as soon as possible. Legislation and regulation is coming soon. It's coming within the next year in some cases in the US and the UK. And we expect that to be seen around the world. So if you are looking at this now and you're watching and you haven't got a vulnerability disclosure policy in your business and you're not able to handle those vulnerabilities when they come into your business, then act now. That's your New Year's resolution. Okay, thank you very much.